Hey everyone! Alright, so today I thought I would tell you, actually, you know what, before I get into today, I have some exciting news that I just tweeted out about come on, it's here. Here it is! My YouTube channel just hit 10,000 subscribers, and YouTube sent me this email with this fun little GIF. Boom, super exciting. So, yeah, I'm literally live right now, but, I guess since I got the email and tweeted about it, I got another 142, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, share this with your friends and stuff. It was pretty exciting to hit 10,000. So thanks for believing in me enough to subscribe to my channel. All right, so today I thought I would talk about React hooks and compound components pattern. I think somebody brought this up recently. Asked me what would it look like with hooks, and so I thought, oh, we'll just see. I haven't actually done it yet, so hopefully this goes well. But I have this Advanced React Patterns course. The material is on GitHub, and I have it on Front-End Masters. It is Advanced React Patterns V2. So you can go kcd.im/fem Front-End Masters, and that will take you to this page. And then I also have it on Egghead Advanced React Component Patterns, if that's your style, kcd.im Egghead. And yeah, you can check that out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to refactor this from class component to use hooks. One of the cool things about this workshop is it's you can actually use the whole thing in Code Sandbox. I actually created the repo starting in Code Sandbox. Kind of wild. So yeah, I put a link to this particular file, this setup, in the description of this video, so you can go check that out. I think when I'm done, you know what, actually I'm going to fork this, and I'll put my forked version in the description of the video as well, so you can see the beginning and then the ending. So, sweet. Cool, so a button is off and on. It's a toggle button. The whole idea is let's make the thing we're actually building really, really simple so that we can focus on the patterns that we're learning. So great, what we have here is a switch component. We have some context to share that the on state and set on with the rest of the app. We have a custom toggle consumer that will render the toggle consumer, the built-in one, and verify that our toggle consumer is being rendered within that context. So that's an interesting thing we'll have to deal with. We also have a bunch of static properties on this toggle class. And so we're going to be getting rid of the toggle class altogether. We'll consume this, the toggle consumer differently. And yeah, so we're going to be just refactoring all this. It's not a whole lot of code. We're down to line 59 right here. But yeah, and then we've got our usage and stuff that's irrelevant to our case. This is the way that it's going to be used, though, and so we want to preserve that. We're just going to rewrite this so that it works, or that it's implemented in hooks, but it should work exactly the same. Okay, cool. So let's make that happen. I know that from React, I'm going to need use context. We're also going to need use state. And I think that is it. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make a function called toggle. And this function is going to have on and set on is use state. We'll initialize that to false, I believe is what we initialize it to here. Yep. We're putting toggle inside of state, and maybe we'll deal with that later. Maybe we won't need to do that with our situation. So anyway, we're going to initialize that to false. And then we're going to need to render the same thing that we're rendering in our regular toggle. So we'll just copy that over. And cool. And then anytime you're refactoring to hooks, anytime you see this dot, you just get rid of that. You don't need it. Okay, so then we've got props coming in. Okay, so our value is going to be state, but it's not just our state. So what we were doing before in our class component is we had on as false, and then toggle is this dot toggle, and then providing this dot state to the value. The reason we were doing that is because the alternative would be to inline this. In fact, I've got an example of this. If we go to the first implementation, the more naive implementation, we just say value is equal to this object. Every time this toggle gets rendered, the toggle context provider gets rendered, it's going to check the value, and if the value is changed, then it's going to re-render all of the consumers. And that basically means anytime this provider gets re-rendered at all, the value will change because it's a new object every time. But we have new ways of dealing with that here, so we're not going to worry about that for right now, and we'll deal with that in a little bit. So we'll give it just a regular object, and let's see, the state is called on, and then the function is called toggle, so we'll say on and toggle. So let's make that toggle, const toggle equals set on, old on, not old on. Okay, sweet. So good, yeah, that's our toggle component right there. So let me get rid of oh yeah, and then we have a prop called onToggle that we need to call whenever toggle changes, and that's getting passed as the second argument to set state. So basically, we're basically saying here, anytime I change the on state, once that state has changed, after that state has been changed, I want to call this.props.onToggle to inform whoever's using this that the toggle state has changed. Because here in our situation, we want to say, hey, this is what I want to render, but I want to know when the toggle state is being changed, so I'm going to provide this onToggle function. And all we're really doing is we're just going to log it to the console, but presumably we'll save that state somewhere, or that'll make some effect in the UI or something. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and solve that. What we're going to use to solve that is use effect. And so we'll add a use effect, and we want this effect callback to be run when the on state changes. And then in here we'll say props.onToggle, and let's see, did we call that onToggle? Yeah, with the current state of on, so we'll just say on. Okay, cool. So that's not actually quite going to do it for us, because this is going to be called the first time that we're rendered. And so we'll have to deal with that. I'll probably make a custom hook that says use updated effect or something like that. So an effect callback that only runs on updates. So we'll deal with that in a little bit, but this should be good for now. Yeah, okay, sweet. So cool, let's go ahead and we'll extract these static components out. And actually what I think we'll do for now, some people don't like the static idea that like we've got toggle and then toggle.on and .off and .button. They think that's kind of weird. I actually really like it. It does make it so that you can't tree shake things. So lots of people would say, oh, let's just export those, and if you need it, you import those from the module or something. And I can see that as being valuable if these components were not commonly used by the users of the toggle component, like maybe only sometimes do we need on and sometimes do we need off or whatever. Yeah, whatever you want to do, I don't really care. You can choose. But what we're going to do is I'm going to say for each one of those statics, it'll be toggle dot, and then we'll just assign that to those functions. So they are effectively static properties. Okay, then we can get rid of the rest of this thing and save that, and actually it should work right now. Woo! Nice. So from here on out, we can do some more optimizations, particularly with these compound components. So the main component here is our toggle. This is the thing that's rendering the provider. It's rendering like it's managing the state, and then so it's wiring up all of the things together for our compound component. So you can think of this like the select, and then our other ones are options. Okay, so the select is the one that kind of manages the state, and then the options do things based off of the state. They set their selected property and stuff like that, or attribute. Sweet. So yeah, I think the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to change these compound components to not use a render prop based API. and to use the context consumer directly, we're going to lose this capability to validate that our consumer is being rendered within the context, but we can get that back with a custom hook. So what we're going to do from the start is I'm just going to say toggle.on equals, it's going to take children. And in here, we're going to say on equals use context, toggle context. Nope, not consumer, context. There we go. And then we'll return on children, otherwise null. Okay, so these are effectively like pretty much the same thing. Okay, I'm not sure why I'm getting. Oh, that's weird. That's clearly a bug in the ESLint rules of hooks, so I should probably file that. But so what we're going to do instead is I'll say function on. We probably would be good with const on equals that, and then say toggle on equals on. Yeah. So there's a bug with the rules of hooks ESLint plugin, which is fine. Hooks isn't even released yet. Okay, cool. So this should still work. Yep, we get on rendered. All right, sweet. So we'll do the same thing with our off. So this will be off and off. And then we'll just swap these. Oops, null, otherwise children. We can get rid of that. And then we'll do similar for the button. So I'll say button equals props. And we'll get our on and toggle from use context, toggle context, and then we'll just return this thing. Sweet. And then we can say toggle.button equals button with a lowercase u. Okay, sweet. So everything is working great. So now our compound components are using hooks. All right, so let's get that validation back, because if we were to render these outside of, here, let's do div here, div. So if we didn't render the provider, then this actually is like still working. Wait, what? Oh, snap. This whole time I've been working on the wrong thing. This isn't rendering the right thing. This is, we're working in 03 extra 2 JS, and we should be working in 03. What it's rendering is 03. So I'm gonna come back here. We'll just paste all that there. Sorry. And yeah, and then of course it's not working, and now I'll have to debug. Probably broke something a long time ago. Sorry about that. All right, here, I'm gonna get rid of this toggle consumer, just clean up a little bit. We'll leave that there and just comment it out. All right, let's pop open the DevTools, figure out what I broke. Okay. So, ay caramba, here we go. Let's refresh, clear out our console. And okay, now we can see what broke. Use context is not a function. Well, what? Am I misspelling use context? I do believe I have the correct version of React. Maybe I don't know. Okay, let's go back here. We'll switch this to toggle on toggle equals on toggle and toggle. And if the error changes to what? Oh, that should be swapped. There we go. If the error changes to use state is not a function, yeah, okay, I've got the wrong version of React in here. Okay. Go back to package.json. I thought I updated that. I totally did update that. Code sandbox is, I don't know, just kidding. Alpha.2. There we go. Okay, now I need to get rid of that thing. We'll get rid of this one. Okay, and sweet. Okay, it's working. Let's make sure that I am rendering the right thing. Hi. Hi. Whew. Okay, we are back in the saddle, friends. Okay, so let's figure out what we need to do to get that validation back. So if I go div and div here, we're no longer rendering the toggle context provider. So we're getting an error because we're rendering these things and we're saying, hey, use context. And it's like, okay, there's no default value for our context. And so when we try to destructure off of undefined, essentially, we're going to get an error. And so if we look at that error, it's not very helpful. Yeah, cannot read property on of undefined. Okay, so that is a problem. Like, I mean, we're getting an error. It's not going to work either way. If we don't have anything in context, if we're not rendering context within the context of our tree, then using this component doesn't make any sense. But it would be nice if we could provide a nicer error message for people so we can say, hey, you forgot to render the toggle component. Make sure you're doing that. And that's what we were doing before. When we use the render prop based APIs, we'd say, hey, if there is no context, then we'll just throw an error that says toggle compound components cannot be rendered outside the toggle component. Then people know what to do. So that's what we're going to do is I'm going to make a custom hook function use toggle context. And I actually think that this is the way that you should be working with context and hooks in real applications. You make a context thing, and then you make a custom hook for consuming that context. Rather than exposing the whole context itself. That seems to make sense, most of the sense to me, because then you can hook into, like, make sure that people are using context properly, or perhaps you could, like, filter down the pieces of context that you provide via a, argument or whatever. So in our case, we are just going to do this right here. So I'm going to just pull this out, and we'll paste that there. And we're going to get this, and we'll paste this here. And instead of destructuring that, we're going to say context. So then we'll say if there's not a context, then we'll throw. Otherwise, we'll return the context. And then on all of these places, instead of use context toggle context, we can just say use toggle context. And with that, everything is still working. But then if we don't render inside of this, we can just render the div. And we're going to get an error. It's not going to work. Maybe we should add an error boundary to our app or whatever. But up here, it says, if you can see that behind my head, whoop, toggle compound components cannot be rendered outside the toggle component. I don't know if that's big enough for you to see. So there you go. Kind of cool. Whoop. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this refactor. So let's see if we can look at a before and after. Where was that other before I forked it? Well, you'll have to look at the before. No. I will find it. Let me go back here. Nope, we'll go back to this one. Okay, yeah. So here we have the before. And we'll just whoosh that over. Okay, so before we had a toggle context, react.create context. We had a toggle consumer that's using the render prop based API. We had a toggle class where we specified static children components or static compound components. That use that render prop based toggle consumer. And then we have this toggle function and our state. We're putting toggle in state. And then we're rendering out this thing with the provider and children. So now the way that it works is, here, let's get rid of this old toggle consumer thing. We have our toggle that's using state and has toggle. We need to fix this use effect, and we need to fix this value. So we'll deal with those here in a sec. Yeah, so we use effect to call our props to on toggle with the on state. And then we have this custom use toggle context that will throw an error if there is no context, meaning we haven't actually rendered it yet or rendered our provider, which is not a good thing. And then we have our custom function components here. So the cool thing, all function components really pretty straightforward. And then we can expose this use toggle context, not a render prop based API, which is a little bit nicer to use, I think. In these simple situations, it's easy to look at this and be like, oh, well, I mean, like, that isn't all that complicated. And you're totally right. It is not that complicated. But as in a more practical scenario, having a bunch of consumers that you're rendering and stuff, you get really nested. And so I'm much happier with this. Okay, cool. So before I wrap things up, I need to deal with two things. First is, if I pop open the console, I'm going to get on toggle as false. And that happens even before I start clicking. Whoop, come on. Whoop, before I start clicking on this. So I should only get that on toggle callback called when the user has actually toggled it, not when the component is first mounted. So what I'm going to do is we need to find some way to make this useEffect callback only call our props on toggle when the user has actually toggled the state. And we could do that in our toggle callback. We could just call props.onToggle in there. But I think it's important to, like one of the cool things about useEffect is that it's scheduled to happen at a later time. And so what that means is that you're not going to block rendering with whatever the response to onToggle is. So like whoever is passing this onToggle function, whatever that function is doing, if we put things right in here, it's going to block the re-render of our component until after it's finished doing its work, whatever that work is. Whereas if we put it in this useEffect, then our thing will be rendered, and then the onToggle function can do whatever it's doing. So we get a much more responsive app, just kind of out of the box. So I think I'm leaning more towards useEffect for stuff like this. And the fact that we can just provide the thing that when we want the effect to be called, like when these things change, call this effect, that just makes it really nice and easy to use. But it does give us the problem of, hey, I haven't actually even, the state hasn't actually changed yet. It was just initialized. And so this is the first time I'm going to be called. So what we're going to do for this first is we'll use ref to track our mounted state. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do this, but I think that it is. So we'll say mounted, use ref false, and so mounted.current is going to be false. So then we could say if mounted.current, so if it is mounted, or let's see, if it's not mounted, but like, yeah, just mounted. Okay, so if it's just mounted, if it's not just mounted, right? So it's just mounted, true. Okay, so if it's not been just mounted, then we'll call props on toggle. And in any case, we're going to assign that to false. Okay, so now we're not getting the console log, and we get it when I toggle that. Sweet. Cool. Okay, so this is some imperative code that I don't really like. And I can see myself using this in other places. And even if I wasn't, I kind of like the use of functions as a way to kind of document the code. So I'm going to say use effect after mount. There's probably like 6 npm modules for this already, to be honest. So I'm going to copy all this. We'll put this in here, and it will just provide a callback and input, or they changed the terminology to dependencies, which is fine. We'll put dependencies in here. Just mounted is fine. And we'll call the callback right there. Yeah, sweet. And we'll want to return that callback probably, just in case they want to clean up or something. Yeah, sweet. So then we can say use callback after mount, or use effect after mount. We'll get rid of those. And yeah, there we go. Now we get that same functionality, but our like source, the part that like we normally will care to maintain reads a lot cleaner. We just say, oh, this effect callback only runs after it's been mounted, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that was one thing. Now let's talk about this. So we need to only change this value when on and toggle change. So we need to, I don't know, memoize that value. Oh yeah, let's do that. Okay, so we've got use ref, we've got use memo. And what we want to do is I'm going to grab const on and toggle from useMemo. And this is just going to return on and toggle. And this will only change when the onState changes. And then we can actually, no, we're not going to destructure that. We're going to, actually, we'll just inline it. Goodness. No. Okay, going back. Value. There we go. We'll provide the value. And I didn't like write up a bunch of code to demonstrate the problem and the how this solves it. So you just have to take my word for it. But it is totally working still, which is cool. So what's effectively happening here is this value is getting assigned whatever we return from this useMemo callback. And if this on is true, so let's think about this like in order of operation. So on is false, and so we're going to return a brand new object. Then on changes to true, and we're going to return a new object that is on and toggle. But React is going to keep track. It keeps like a mapping of our dependencies to the values that it returned last time. So next time when on is false again, it's going to say, oh, you already were false once before. I'm going to grab the object that you had before and bring that back. And so what's nice about that is if this component re-renders for any other reason, on does not change or whatever, this useMemo is going to call again, and it's going to say, oh, on is false still. So I'm going to grab that same old object, and the toggle context provider is going to be like, sweet, it's the same old object. I don't need to call the consumers. That's the idea. That's what's going on there. So yeah, useMemo is a good solution for that. Now, one other thing that we could do, I'm like, we don't really need to do this, but one thing that we could do is add a use callback. And this is like a shortcut for useMemo, use callback, for callback specifically. So here we can provide a callback and our dependencies for that callback. And now it's like a memoized callback. So we're only going to, we're going to return that same function every time, rather than allocating a new space in memory for this function every time. Okay, that wasn't quite right. So every time this render runs, memory will be allocated for the function that we're defining here. That's just the way JavaScript works. But the function that gets assigned to toggle will be the same so long as the onState never changes. So we can go back and forth. And actually, and so what that allows us to do is here we could say not on. And so then we don't need to worry about like in fact, we never needed to really worry about the state of that on. We didn't have to use the callback form. But one case or one optimization we can make further is we could say, hey, this function can remain the same always. It always is going to be the same. So we'll provide an empty list of dependencies. And now it's actually not going to toggle back and forth because this function is the same every single time we re-render, which means that we're calling setOn with the same value of on that it was when we initially created this toggle function, which basically means this function, like this is where time gets in. It's kind of confusing, but this function at the time it was initially created had a closure, and the value of on at the time that function was created is never going to change. Even though we're re-rendering this over time, we're creating new variables and new functions and stuff because we're using this use callback and we're saying always get me that same callback that you created the first time. We're going to not get the new value of on here. And so what we can do is we can take this back to what did I call it before? Current on or old on. That's right. And now it's old on. And now this will make it work. So we're actually, every time, like our toggle will always be the same function every single time that we render. And it doesn't matter like what else we provide here. We're always returning the same callback function because we have a list of empty dependencies. And so it's never going to say, okay, get me the new toggle. It's always going to be the same toggle. And actually I can prove that. We'll say window.myToggle equals window.toggle. my toggle or toggle. And we'll console log toggle equals window.my toggle. So the first time that console log is going to log us false because window.my toggle is not defined yet. But I re-render, and every other time it's going to be true. So every single time we re-render that window my toggle thing, it's always the same old toggle that we've always had before, which is pretty interesting. Mostly, like I said, that's not super useful for us now because we're using this use memo anyway, and so it always will be that way. We're always going to get the same toggle that we needed, but yeah, it can be useful. Yeah, just a couple of different ways to do kind of the same thing. Actually, because we're using this use memo, if we didn't use the use callback and we just relied on the closure, then this will actually work still. Well, I lost my train of thought of what I was trying to explain. Now I can't remember. But anyway, this works fine, and I think it's great. So yeah, this is a bit longer than I expected it would be because I kind of got into the weeds of use callback and use memo. But hopefully it was at least interesting and useful. I don't think that you typically will need to use these a whole lot unless you're doing stuff like pure component or you're really worried about over rendering. So like where value is doing a shallow comparison, it's like, is the previous value the same as the new value? If it is not, then we're going to re-render all the consumers. So if you're conscious about that or you're worried about that, then that's where use callback and use memo can come in really handy. Also, if you're rendering a component that is like a pure component or React.memo, like a function or a component that implements should component update, for example, if you're rendering one of those, then you're going to want to use callback or use memo for any of the event handlers or whatever you're passing to those. Otherwise, you kind of lose the value there. Okay, that's it. Hopefully that was interesting. And nobody's asking questions, so hopefully that all made sense. All right, I'm gonna jump out. I hope this was fun, and I will see you all later. Goodbye.